Now, the European Union have reportedly intensified backroom talks with the Labour Party in the hope that the party will honour agreements made by the current government if Jeremy Corbyn gets into power. But is there any clarity on Labour's position on Brexit? Let's take a look.
The damage that would be done to our economy by pulling out of the single market at this time could be substantial.
We wouldn't want to leave membership of the single market.
Our aim is to have a tariff-free trade access to Europe. I think we should put it in those terms rather than anything else at this stage.
I think people will interpret membership of the single market as not respecting that referendum.
You want to end up with the same benefits, but you're definitely leaving.
No. What we've said is it's an open question.
So the Labour position is this, is we leave the European Union. As leaving the European Union, it means we need to leave the single market.
We want to retain the benefits that we currently have as part of the customs union and the single market. Now, whether that's inside or outside, that's a moot point.
To be absolutely crystal clear, we leave the single European market because we leave the EU.
The two things are inextricably
So we have to leave
linked.
the single market.
Yes. What we've said is the transitional period, i.e. from March 2019 until we get to a new and final deal, will be within a customs union and within the single market. It's not a U-turn, it's a development of our policy.
We think that being part of the customs union and the single market is important in those transitional times because that's the way you protect jobs and the economy, and it might be a permanent outcome of the negotiations, but we've got to see how those negotiations go.
Well, joining me now is the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry. A range of views there from your Labour colleagues on what our future relationship with the EU might look like. Could you help us now decipher what Labour's position actually is at the moment?
Sure. One of the problems that I have when talking to journalists is that they want to have it in sound bites. And they want to have it in terms of kind of structures and things that they can put into a headline. And the difficulty is when you're in a negotiation, and to be honest, when you're the opposition to a government that's supposed to be going into negotiation, what you don't want to do is end up with a tight package with, bound around with red lines and here, that and the other, because that is not a helpful contribution. What we have tried to do throughout is we have tried to say we must leave the European Union and abide by the results of the referendum. We need to leave, but we need to have the same benefits that we had from being in the European Union, which means that we need to be pretty close. We need to make sure that we look after the economy more than anything else, and frankly that's what governments ought to do, and the safety and security of our citizens. And Keir has put forward his 6 tests, and so we would be an alternative government that would be able to reset our relationship with the European Union and go in with those broad principles.
And in order to achieve what you talk about, which sounds a little bit like having your cake and eating it, would you be prepared to accept...
like being reasonable.
Would you be prepared to accept some freedom of movement of people?
I think that we need to look again at that, and nobody can pretend that the referendum wasn't about freedom of movement, amongst other things. We have to look at the definition of who is a worker and who isn't a worker. We need to look at how it is that we are able to have free, fair rules and manage migration. We need to be able to move to a position like that. And when David Cameron went out before the general election in 2015, that was his golden opportunity to reform the pillars of the single market. And he blew it because he wasn't serious about it. He didn't speak on behalf of the country. He was just trying to keep the Tory party together, as has been throughout the whole of this Brexit stuff. It's all about internal Tory party politics. Now, we really do want to go ahead and leave the European Union on behalf of the British country, not on behalf of the Tory party or internal politics, but looking to what will look after our country best.
There have been reports that EU officials have stepped up their contacts with the Labour Party because they're now wondering, actually, if you might be in government by the time a deal is finally done. Is that true?
We've been in I've been to Brussels on a number of occasions. I speak to an awful lot of our European partners. One of the questions they always ask is, could you help us with what it is the government wants? And
I bet they ask, could you help us with what Labour's position is?
No, because we can be clear about that. We can say we are internationalists. We believe in working with the European Union. We believe it's in our interest and in your interest to come to a deal on a reasonable basis and in a spirit of goodwill. We are not going to be standing on the sidelines shouting at you. We appreciate that we need to have an ongoing relationship with Europe and we need to come to something that will be good for both of us.
Now, Jeremy Corbyn says that the Labour Party are on the threshold of power and would welcome a snap election, which would put you, as the Foreign Secretary, involved in the Brexit negotiations. If that happened, would you honour the agreements that the British government had made thus far so that you weren't having to go back to the beginning?
I think there's an awful lot of ifs and buts on that. I mean, at the moment...
It's something you must have thought about.
Of course. But, you know, at the moment, the main thing we're thinking about is what on earth is it that the government wants and where are we going to get to in relation to the Article 50 negotiations. Now, we have been pressing the government to have interim arrangements which are basically keep the status quo because we want...
Which they've now agreed to.
Well, yeah. But, you know, now they need to kind of get the European Union to agree to it. And what a shame it was they weren't saying that right at the outset 17 months ago. We want them to do no more harm. Do no more harm and leave it to us, the grown-ups, to negotiate. That's our position.
Hang on, you're asking for the UK government to provide all sorts of clarity on detail, whilst at the same time you won't tell us whether you want to stay in the single market after we've left the EU, stay in the customs union after we leave the EU. I mean, these are not fine details. These are basic points of principle.
No, what we have always said, and I think that, I mean, to a certain... It's a bit annoying because we have been saying consistently the same thing. I mean, we have been developing it over the period, but we are consistent.
So consistently saying you will or will not stay in the single market after leaving?
Consistently saying that we are a very large economy. It is very difficult to squeeze us into a box. We cannot say we will have this, you know, this model, that model. There needs to be a British-style agreement with the European Union because nothing else will really work. Well, that's exactly what Dominic Raab
was just saying. We want a bespoke deal that suits us, that gives us everything that we want.
I've just heard, I mean, to a certain extent, we have been saying this consistently, and if the Tories start sounding a bit more like Labour, then I'm really pleased because we are taking a reasonable position on this. And if we start, you know, converting people to our way of thinking, then we are doing the right thing for the country.
Well, that just means that Labour and the Tories are both asking for the world, asking for a perfect deal where we get everything that we want and don't have to put up with any of the things that we didn't
there were certain differences, aren't there? So, for example, last year, at this time last year, when Theresa May did her speech to Tory party conference, I had gone to Europe, right? I'd gone to Brussels a couple of days before Theresa May's speech and then a week or so afterwards. And after she made that speech, they said to me, Emily, there's no point really talking to you anymore. You know, what Theresa May has said about the European Court of Justice, about this and about that. She was putting down so many ridiculous red lines that, frankly, you're out of the customs union, you're out of the single market, you're out of any continuing relationship. It's just a question of how loud are you going to slam the door and will you put two fingers up before you go? I mean, you know, that was kind of, that's where they thought that we are. And we have been dragging them back from that position since then and trying to consistently say, we must leave the European Union, but we have to look after the economy. You know, if the economy goes south, people will lose their jobs. So do you want to do that by staying in the single market? Has the single market been good for the British economy up until now, and therefore would it be good if we were to stay in it? You know what the difficulty is. We need to be able to be truthful to the referendum. We need to be able to move to a position whereby we have fair rules and manage migration, for example, as one of those things. We need to be able to look after the economy. We need to be able to find a compromise with the European Union on this and a number of other issues. So, for example, the issue about the European Court of Justice. Theresa May has said, we want nothing to do with the European Court of Justice. As soon as we leave, after Article 50 has finished, we will be out. This is nonsense. We need to be looking again at that and being reasonable on this. We cannot leave most of these European institutions. Let's talk then about the general direction of travel. I was asking Dominic Raab there, do we want a Canadian-style deal whereby we're able to go and make all sorts of new trade deals with other countries around the world and have a new relationship with Japan, China, India, or do we want to stay very close to the EU, mirror their rules in order that we've got the best possible access to the single market? As I said to you, I mean, it's difficult for me to answer questions when you put them in this way because I don't think that these models fit us. And can I also say, which I ought to say as part of... You're asking for a bespoke model, yes. But heading in what direction? You must know roughly whether we want to stay as close as possible to the EU or whether we want to branch out in a different direction. I think that we should be staying... We need to leave the European Union, but it is good for our economy. They're our biggest market, that we stay as close as we can. And the problem that the British country has is that a good half of the Tory party wants to go sailing off into the mid-Atlantic with no deal at all, and that would be disastrous for our country. What about the prospect of a second referendum on the EU deal if the final negotiations don't produce the kind of deal that you're talking about? I think there are a number of stages. So there's the Article 50, and before we get to the Article 50, Parliament needs to have a vote on that, and we've pushed the government on that, and we will get that, and we will do that representing the interests of our constituents. Then there will hopefully be an interim period during which there will be further negotiations. Let's take these things step by step. We are such a long way from even getting Article 50 sorted out.
You're not ruling out the idea that there could be a second referendum once we see the terms of the deal?
Our position at the moment is that we do not have a second referendum. We leave the European Union, but frankly, we want to be involved in the negotiations and we want to lead it. And we are doing the best we can to push the government in the right direction at the moment from the opposition. Just think what a better job we would do if we were in government.
Emily Thornberry, thanks very much for that.